Welcome to the first video of Unit 7. In this unit, we will cover the early Middle Ages in Europe. We are going to reference some of the things we've talked about recently, including the fall of Rome, the Byzantine Empire, and the Islamic Empire. So just to get a quick reference of terminology, the Middle Ages or medieval period was a period of conflict, instability, and slow cultural advances, which lasts from around 500 to 1500 AD or CE. So we're going to cover what happened in Europe during that period. When we last checked in with Europe, we were talking about the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. So if you remember, Diocletian splits the empire into two, and Constantine is going to bring them back together. He's going to move the capital from Rome to Constantinople, Byzantium, and then he renames it Constantinople. And then we just talked about how the Western Roman Empire collapsed. The Eastern Roman Empire became the Byzantine Empire. Well, if you remember back to when the Western Roman Empire collapsed, we talked about Germanic invasions briefly. What we're going to do now is talk more specifically about those Germanic tribes invading into the Western Roman Empire, which was one of the reasons for the collapse of that empire. So the first group that we're going to talk about are the Angles and the Saxons. So the Angles and Saxons invaded modern England and established several small kingdoms around 500 AD or CE. So if you take a look here on the map, we see them coming from what is currently Denmark today. So if we take a look at the map on the previous screen, we're talking about the area up here, the north of Europe, and this is Denmark. And they're going to move from the area of Denmark into England. So they are going to move into this area. As a quick reminder, a lot of these groups, these Germanic tribes, are going to be moving for two main reasons. Either they're being pushed out of their land by other groups, most specifically the Huns, or they are moving because of weather changes and the need to find food and settle and be somewhere where they can actually feed their people. So the Angles and Saxons are going to move from Europe more broadly, or Denmark more specifically, and they are going to move into England. The Vikings were a Germanic group who lived around the fjords of Scandinavia. So a fjord is a narrow body with steep sides created by a glacier. The reason this is important is fjords make it very difficult for settling and for growing crops. Because they are steep sides, there are glaciers, which means not a lot of farmland, and so they needed to move in order to find better farmland or more stable food source. So the weather was cold, farming was difficult, so Vikings raided neighboring areas for food and wealth. So when we're talking about Scandinavia, we're talking about up here. So they are going to move from the fjords of Scandinavia up here to the north. So this is even further north than Denmark, where we just talked about the Angles and Saxons. Now we are up here. The Vikings used their long ships to conquer their neighbors. The ships were strong enough to travel on the ocean, but shallow enough to travel up rivers. This was important because it allowed them to transport a large number of soldiers very quickly, which the element of surprise was important to them. So they would take these long ships up onto shore. They would have enough soldiers then to go and attack and raid villages. It was one of their main strategies. The Vikings also traded along the rivers throughout Europe, traveling as far as Russia, Constantinople, and Italy. So if we look at this map, it's a little blurry, but you see Byzantine Empire is written here. This is Constantinople. So we're talking about trade through Constantinople and into Russia, all up and down this region here. Viking groups also colonized Iceland, Greenland, and even briefly North America. Gradually, Vikings converted to Christianity. The global temperature increased, allowing for more farming, and these events ended up causing a decline in Viking raids around the year 1200. So first, the fact that they were converting to Christianity, and that is going to stop them from attacking and pillaging and raiding as openly and violently as they were. And the temperature increase is going to have an effect because now they can settle, they can farm, and they're going to be able to feed their own people. Next, we're going to talk about the Germanic tribe of the Magyars. So the Magyars were a nomadic group who moved from Central Asia to present-day Hungary in Eastern Europe. The Magyars were excellent horsemen who raided isolated villages and captured slaves, and they did not establish permanent settlements, so they continued to move around and raid different regions. So on this map, we've already covered the Vikings who came from Scandinavia. The Vikings are going to go pretty much everywhere. We also talked about the Angles and Saxons who went from here in Denmark over into England, and now we're talking about the Magyars, this green group here, coming from Central Asia and moving largely into the regions of Hungary, but also going further than that as well. Again, they don't settle in one specific place. Another group that is going to invade into Europe during this time are going to be Muslims. We already talked about the Islamic Empire and its expansion across northern Africa into Spain. And we've even talked about the Battle of Tours, where their expansion into Europe is stopped. So even though Muslims were defeated at the Battle of Tours in 732 AD or CE, they continued to raid Mediterranean islands and the southern coast of Europe. So they're still going to play a big role in who controls the Mediterranean Sea. The Mediterranean Sea became what could be known as a Muslim lake until the 1500s because they have largely control of the entire Mediterranean, or they're fighting for control of the Mediterranean. So if we look at this, everything here that is in green is part of the Islamic Empire, is under Muslim control. So many of the islands as well, and you see the green lines are showing attacks so that it's not just what they already possess, but they are fighting for control of these regions as well. So causes of the Middle Ages. Following the decline and fall of Western Roman Empire, Europe broke apart into many smaller, weaker kingdoms. We're going to cover this even more closely. Trade was disrupted, the second reason, by invading barbarian tribes and the lack of maintenance on Roman roads. So areas could not trade with one another because of these invasions. And so people weren't given access to as many goods as they were previously. 3, cities shrunk in size and population because of barbarian attacks and the lack of administration by a strong government. So there was no real control in the cities. People had to leave the cities because there weren't resources coming in because trade was disrupted. No one was really ruling it properly anymore. And 4, the population shifted to the countryside and to the Byzantine Empire in the east. So for those in the east, they became part of the Byzantine Empire. For those in Western Europe, they are going to largely move to the countryside where they have more opportunity to survive because they're away from the large cities where these groups are attacking, and they have the opportunity for farming. But we're going to talk about how kingdoms are going to be set up in these regions in the next video. So this just shows you the lessening of the population in Rome. Like we said, cities were where people were leaving from, not where people were going to. When Rome collapsed, 99% of Rome's population was lost in 900 years. So characteristics of the Middle Ages included the following. Invading Germanic tribes had no written language, so Greek and Latin works were nearly lost. So as these Germanic tribes were invading, they didn't write down things from Greek and Roman achievements that we've talked about. We've talked about medical achievements. We've talked about scientific and mathematic and written achievements. And these are not going to be preserved by the Germanic tribes, which is why it's so important that the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic Empire are going to preserve those works and improve on them. Regional languages, including Spanish, French, German, started to replace Latin and Greek. So the main languages in the Roman Empire, Latin, and then Greek in the Byzantine Empire. And so all of these other languages, regional languages, we're going to start replacing those, which means more languages, which means more separation between people because they don't speak the same language. So in Western Europe, the only people who still used Latin were priests. So this just represents the idea that there were many different languages in Europe during this time, again causing separation between groups of people because they didn't have that ability to communicate as well. Other characteristics of the Middle Ages during this period, borders constantly shifted and small kingdoms rose and fell quickly, meaning there wasn't a lot of stability. The Christian church was the only source of stability in most of Europe. So the Christian church became incredibly important to people in Europe in the Middle Ages. It was their source of stability. They could go there, they could be fed, they could be told that things were going to be okay. It was their source of moral authority. It was their source of just general stability, something to know that it was always going to be there. The leadership of Germanic tribes was based on personal leadership, family ties, bravery, and honor. There was no loyalty to distant kings. So Germanic tribes were led by those who were there fighting with them. So Germanic tribes were not fighting for someone way back forever away that they would never meet. Instead, they were loyal to the people who led them into battle. And so those were the ones that they would stick with. One Germanic tribe called the Franks emerged as the strongest power under the leadership of Clovis. So this here shows you what becomes the Frankish Empire, which is this blue here. Clovis and the Franks. Clovis converted to Christianity in 496 AD or CE because he wanted to win a battle against another Germanic leader. When Clovis won the battle, all of his men converted to Christianity too, because Clovis believed that the fact that he had converted to Christianity is the reason that he won this battle, this very important battle. And so his men began to convert to Christianity as well. Clovis and the Franks convinced other tribes to convert, and so Christianity spread even stronger, more quickly in this region, within what becomes the Frankish Empire. So here we see the leader of the Frankish Empire and then the Pope. And so we're going to see a merge of Christianity and leadership in Europe during this time. Christian missionaries helped spread religion throughout Europe, often at great personal risk to themselves. They would have to travel. We've talked about missionaries traveling, spreading their faith. They would have to travel without protection, their chance of being killed by other Germanic tribes. But they found it important to spread the religion. Missionaries opened monasteries all over Europe to help convert local tribes. So these missionaries opened these stable locations where people could come and possibly be fed and be taught about the religion. So more on that stability. Monasteries became the best educated communities in Europe for the next 1,000 years. These monasteries are the only place in Western Europe where Greek and Roman learning was preserved. They operated schools, they translated books, all done by monks who lived in these monasteries. And it was very important because these were the only people in Europe at the time. The monks in the monasteries were the only people in Europe who could read and write. 99% of Europe's population could not read and write. And so the monks are the ones who preserve a lot of these ideas. After Clovis's death, Charles Martel, or Charles the Hammer, became the Frankish king. Charles Martel's army defeated a Muslim army at the Battle of Tours in 732 AD. This victory halted the spread of Islam into Europe and made Charles a hero for Christianity. So we've already talked about the Battle of Tours and the importance in that it kept Islam from expanding into Europe, and instead Christianity was the major religion found in Europe. Charles Martel's son, Pepin the Short, defeated the Lombards and gained the title King by the Grace of God from the Pope. So here we see an even further significance in the increasing connection between the Catholic Church and Christian kings. And Pepin's son, Charlemagne, or Charles the Great, was the strongest Frankish ruler. The Frankish Empire was at its peak during his rule between 768 and 814 CE. So we see here on this map how large the Frankish Empire is going to become, largely under the leadership of Charlemagne. And we will talk a little bit more about him. We'll finish this section in the next video. And then we will talk about feudalism in Europe as well.